out, some to 1 and some to 4. We really appreciate that. We're going to go through the presentation with information for this session, information that we did not provide on the opening night at the statutory public meeting. That was in April. We failed to bring forward the information that you were looking for to answer questions. We had our consultants do that for us. Tonight, you have staff. There are no consultants attached to this. They're not here today, so you will get the answers from us. If you could, next slide, please. Sorry, my lectern's a little smaller this time. We're going to start with the Indigenous land acknowledgement. Indigenous peoples have unique and enduring relationships with the land. Indigenous peoples have lived on and cared for this land throughout the ages. We acknowledge this, and we recognize the significance of the land on which we gather and call home. We acknowledge the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and Haudenosaunee peoples and the Anishinaabe of the Williams Treaties. This land is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We honor and respect Indigenous heritage and the long-lasting history of the land and strive to protect the land, water, plants, and animals that have inhabited this land for the generations yet to come. Next slide. So this is our agenda for the day, or the evening, I should say. We're going to start with opening remarks from our mayor. She's going to spend about 5 minutes sharing information with you, and then we're going to move into the 4 big questions that sort of arose from the statutory public meeting in April. That's why now, who are the developers, why didn't you share the letters, that's the one from the ministry and from the Region of Peel, and does the lawyer have a conflict? Then we're going to go into a bit of an overview, including the community infrastructure parts for all 12 parcels. Look at water and wastewater infrastructure, and look at A10, which is one scenario that gives us a proposal for what increased density could look like, and then the town's readiness, including financing. So I am going to hand it over to Mayor Groves, if you could come on up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending another session. And as Janet indicated, this is our final public information session this evening. So thank you for coming out and taking an interest in your community. I want to recognize that all members of council, I think all members with the exception of Councillor DeBoer, is present with us this evening. They have been here throughout these sessions to listen to the questions, to listen to your concerns. So just want to recognize that they are here as well tonight. I am not going to take very much time. You've had an opportunity to look at the boards, and I think you've also had an opportunity to get a lot of your questions answered throughout these sessions. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Janet, and she can begin the evening. So once again, thank you for coming out.
I really didn't need a stopwatch this time. That's great. So thank you, and thank you for mentioning the members of council. If I could just have the members of council give a wave so that people can see where you are. Everyone is sitting in different spots across the room, and that's a really deliberate piece. So we don't want to have a situation where we would get quorum. So any chance of them sitting in a group in the room could create the perception that they might have a discussion about some of the points or the things that we're talking about, and that's not what we have. This is about members of council being here to listen along with everyone else. May I get the senior staff at the town to also wave? We're not going to go through everybody's name. We have some folks over here, some other folks in the room. And they too are here. The crew over here will be part of the presentation and or answering your questions at the end. So we're going to run through the presentation, and then we are going to take questions. I have cue cards behind me. Some people have given cue cards. Questions can be brought forward anonymously via cue card, or we have a mic stand in the center. For anyone who wants to come up and ask a question, we'll be facilitating that and trying to get through the presentation as quickly as possible so that as many questions can be addressed as we can. So next slide, please. Next one. So these are the 4 questions that came out of the statutory public meeting. We're going to be touching on all of them, the why now, what about the 2031 pledge, the developers, hiding the letters, why did you hide the letters from the region and from the ministry, and does Loopster Nixon LLP or the lawyer have a conflict? And of course, we will address the elephant in the room, that's the strong mayor powers. Next slide, please. So, why now? So this slide summarizes the 5 key points of why now. The first, the housing pledge has not gone away. It's a great start, but it's not enough. Adversarial decision-making must end. Servicing and transit needs to be planned at scale, not in bits, and ditto with secondary plans. They're community builders at scale. Then strong mayor powers, like them or hate them, create competition between municipalities for the same developers, the same tradespeople, and the same infrastructure incentives from the province as well as the federal government. Next slide. So this is our housing pledge. So as I said, there's no change to the pledge. 13,000 new home starts by 2031, that's 8 years. So our targets to meet that, those are the ones that are identified up here. The first year, 2023, you probably, or you may have if you're following in the media, we got a check from the provincial government for meeting that target. We hit 82% of our target. The reality is by 2051, we have to grow by 220,000 people. So our total population will be 300,000. The challenge that we have on top of this, that's only 27 years away. At the rate we're going, that's about 35 years in order for us to meet that target. You stack on Bill 185, which was passed last Wednesday, and in there's a change to how forecasting is done. It's not something that you or I are going to be thinking about on a daily basis. What it is in terms of the change to forecasting is that suddenly we are going to, with Bill 185 and the provincial planning statement, that 2051 target is probably going to go up. So it isn't going to just be 220,000. We don't have a commitment on that. The change to the way that forecasting is going to be done is going to be tied now to Ministry of Finance forecasting. Why is that material? The Ministry of Finance forecast growth, instead of the one that's been used previously for the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the finance one builds in immigration. That makes it a little bit more real time and works to accommodate the new workforce that will be coming to Canada through the federal program. That means that demand comes sooner. So as I said, we don't know what those numbers look like. It was just passed last Wednesday. But the reality is that the numbers could get significantly bigger than 220. Next slide, please. As we work through this, we all know that nothing happens overnight. I've been in municipal government a long time, and nothing does happen overnight. The illustration that you see on the side here, where it's not exactly a funnel, but they're the big section, which is you plan for a big number, a smaller number actually then gets approved, and then a smaller number yet gets started. That's the reality of the situation that we are in right now. We are working towards planning for many with the hope that a lot get approved and then that many get started. We hit 82% of our 2023 target. And we're working towards this year. I don't have an update yet on where we stand against our 2024 target, but there are a lot of things that can come. We all know that sometimes they don't get built, sometimes they're appealed. We've lived through a lot of appeals in Caledon, and sometimes they're built in a trickle. And we know through media coverage and a whole host of pieces that sometimes developers don't get started, like we're in right now, because of financing, because of many different reasons, that they are slow to get rolling. Next slide, please. So for any of you who have lived in Caledon for even a little while, the acronym BRES probably makes you shudder a little bit. So BRES was a made in Caledon solution for deciding what our future looked like. That was a place where we wanted to expand Bolton with a residential study and expand that population. And the town, there was input gained from that. The town went forward with it to the region. And then everything broke loose at that point. So council said, no, we're going to go away. We want the regional staff to redo the studies. They brought in a facilitator to try to mediate things. If anyone has been around, I was at the region at the time when all of town council walked out breaking quorum because it just didn't make any sense. That what was planned at the lower tier and typically brought forward to advance was not going to be advanced. What did that do? It pitted landowners against landowners, developers against developers. There were more than a dozen appeals sent to the land tribunal. The town itself paid more than $5 million of taxpayer money in appeals. You add together the amount of money that all parties, so the other people at the table, whether it be landowners, whether it be developers, they spent probably about another $25 million. So all told, for this many houses, and that's a zero, my hand's kind of small, it was over $30 million to get to that point. So the reality of the situation is that people who partner with us to try to grow expect things to kind of go off the rails. In this case, going to the land tribunal. So to end that, to have a made in Caledon solution where we decide what we want and how we want to grow is an important part. While this was all going on, Brampton stepped up and said, I'll take your infrastructure, we will grow, we will take your transit. Whether you like the way that Brampton is laid out and you like, or whether or not you like what's going on, the infrastructure elements went to the municipality south of us while we waited to watch what would happen. And development came in dribs, not in a concerted, integrated way. Next slide, please. So with this, with the 12 parcels, this is in our official plan. This is the place where Caledon gets to decide what Caledon is going to look like. And instead of having the growth that we have had dictated to us. So Brez gave us the piecemeal pieces. That's how it came together. Our planning team has always wanted to bring forward integrated, comprehensive planning. That's what they live for. That's what they've studied. That's what they bring to every meeting. And we didn't get to do that. So the official plan, which probably about a month ago or a little bit more, it has brought forward a much greater long-term plan for that urban growth and density. And if you've taken a look at it online, if you're interested, it really does focus growth in the southern part of our town, preserving elements of green space, the Oak Ridges moraine, the escarpment, and all of those pieces. So it's a focused area at the south. So comprehensive planning, and there's lots of folks with lots of knowledge of planning in the room because I recognize that you've been here before and you do your homework. We all know comprehensive planning, it looks at much bigger geographies. It doesn't do the dribs and the pieces. It looks on the whole. It gives us the opportunity for an interconnected design. It's a little more orderly so that we don't end up with the same road into a community like Valleywood as you gotta leave on. Or in Mayfield West, you can come in from the north and leave from the south, but you can't go anywhere else. So if you live in that community, traffic jams are real. Rush hour is real in a little part of Caledon. Rush hour is real in Bolton too if you live on that side, I know. So the comprehensive planning pieces also look at the elements related to transit and utilities, walkability, livability, all of the things that we have as residents, as people who come, who live here, whether they live here, you play here, you work, whatever the case is, it's what everyone wants. And it gives us the opportunity to look at more long-term over short-term wins. Next slide. So the 12 parcels and rezoning affords us an opportunity to look at some of the larger pieces at scale. So in the past, when we're working in a piecemeal sort of situation, it gave our partners, and the reality is, I said, Brampton got the servicing, Brampton got the transit, and I'm not trying to say something bad about Brampton. It was opportunistic. Quite frankly, if I'd worked there, I would have promoted the same thing. The reality of us planning in a piecemeal way and being forced to move in that direction meant that the utility providers, the transit folks, everybody, the Region 2, got a chance to punt our requests down the road a little bit. So they didn't really have to look at it from a long-term planning perspective. So the parcels that we're talking about afford us the opportunity to be able to move forward in a much more integrated way that gets us on the radar. It isn't just, as I was speaking to someone earlier, where the official plan signals, yes, this is the place where urban development should and will occur. That isn't a strong enough signal. So the signal with the rezoning is to move forward so that our partners then have an opportunity to be able to say, okay, then on our long-range plans, we are going to build this in. It also allows us to deal with the energy requirements that building this many homes is going to bring, and sustaining, quite frankly, the type of energy infrastructure that our business community needs. We are a community that is very heavy on a residential tax roll. Some of the challenges that already occur with brownout situations for industry in Bolton will only be exacerbated if those are not addressed. In order to attract the kinds of businesses we really want, we need to have a strong energy infrastructure that allows for that. Next slide, please. So, secondary plans. Lots and lots of folks know the role of secondary plans, and it is the thing that lots of folks who have come to the meetings come with the greatest amount of passion about. So they plan how the community should be built out. They integrate environmental protection, natural heritage into the end result. They involve public meetings and input, and they must be approved by the whole of council. Now, conventional zoning has come in a very sequential way. So conventional zoning has come sequentially after secondary plans. And the rezoning of 12 parcels is more of a, I think Eric and I have gone back and forth on the word, is it concurrent? Is it in tandem? Is it the possibility of working side by side? That's really what the rezoning at this point is intended to do. Secondary plans will still occur. And the rezoning in and of itself, and what I mentioned before about bringing those partners to the table in a little bit more of a long-range planning perspective, is that the signaling isn't as simple as the OP. It is going to be about, you need to plan for this. I did have a request for detailed information on dates of when some of those infrastructure pieces that were raised at the meeting in Bolton. I don't have those with me today, but we can get those in order. That was the water and wastewater elements of what's already in plan, what's already started, and what will be completed by what day. So those ranged anywhere from 2025, 2027, some 2029, and then one or two in the 2035 range. Next slide, please. So, strong mayor powers. So, strong mayor powers were brought in by the provincial government. There are a small number of items that our mayor can do unilaterally by her own decision. There is no vote of council required. That list is fairly small. Then there's another group of things where the mayor can say, okay, I can bring forward a motion. And that's how this rezoning came forward. So in that situation, Mayor Groves was able to bring forward a motion to council to bring forward the zoning bylaws, and by that, a 1/3 vote could occur. So there's, in that situation, and that was a question we came from one meeting, the first meeting to the second one, in those situations, the 1/3 vote will move that particular motion forward. It's now entrenched in the Municipal Act, so it's now embedded. I don't remember the page. I went looking the other day, and it's buried deep in that. And so there are a couple of spots where strong mayor powers can be used specifically, and it's a bylaw to advance a prescribed provincial priority. So that's the language that they've used. There are two elements to that. The first one is in direct support of building 1.5 new residential units by 2031. And the other one is, there's no mention of date. It does speak to the construction and maintenance of infrastructure to support housing. So it is inclusive of transit, roads, utilities, and servicing. That's the one that doesn't have the date. And now that the folks in Queen's Park have gone home for the summer, I don't have a follow-up on that to know whether or not it's tied to 2031 or if it goes in perpetuity beyond that. Municipalities had to set a housing pledge. That's our housing pledge of 13,000 homes. That's how we were able to get strong mayor powers. And that's also how we get the infrastructure incentives from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. That is separate from the incentives from the federal government. They come through a different program. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit of, and I don't have updated numbers because this is from open data. If you're interested in tracking the information with respect to how strong mayor powers gets used, there is an open data website that is collating every decision made by every municipality that has received strong mayor powers and details out each of the motions in there. So in that, 46 municipalities got strong mayor power. And the second point, when we talk about competition, we're not competing with each other. We're competing for the developers, the tradespeople, the infrastructure incentives, and there's only a certain number of developers who are out there. What the rezoning of this work, this essentially signals to developers that we, of all of the places, should be one that you should consider, all things considered, even given the circumstances of the past. So the numbers that you see up here, and again, I just checked them the other day, two days ago. There were no new numbers at that point. So 43 of the 46 had used strong mayor powers, and there were 637 decisions related to strong mayor powers. A small number of them were the unilateral decisions that I mentioned earlier, and a much larger number were of the bringing motion forward to council in order to have and facilitate the vote with a 1/3 majority. So rezoning. Lots of folks said, is this new? Why are you doing it out of order? Why do you need to do rezoning? So we've touched on that a little bit. There are 3 that are listed up here where rezoning has already occurred under strong mayor powers. That's Ajax, Mississauga, and Belleville. So, and for folks who've been here before, I'm sorry this is repetition. In Ajax, they rezoned for 2 60-story towers to bring rental units in specifically into their city. And there's 1,274 rental units that were part of that rezoning. The Mississauga one, you may have heard if you were following along in the media, it was the 4-plex decision, where council made a decision to not do 4-plexes, and the former mayor returned from the Liberal Party convention and said, I'm going to overturn that. And so brought the 4-plex decision to the city of Mississauga. The Belleville one, and I've said this before because I don't know the nuance of what this specific rezoning actually means, but they rezoned from something called highway residential 4th density and open space to highway commercial zone with special provisions. There are very few municipalities in Ontario who were given the opportunity to accept strong mayor powers that turned them down. There were only 4, 3 of which were because they simply said we cannot remotely meet the targets of development because our infrastructure, we're not in a place physically to be able to do that. So the next slide, please. Now, there was also a question around, is this just an MZO for the mayor? So Caledon has lived through MZOs over and over and over again. So the big difference here, and the thing that I just want to, that stood out to me that I want to share, in the middle column under MZO, I have circled on my sheet, and I can show it to you. If you, in the front row, you can see what I've circled. In there, it's not subject to, no notice given, no consultation, may not be subject to, and not subject to regular procedures in the Planning Act. So that's an MZO. The strong mayor zoning bylaw, the difference in the right-hand column, subject to, must comply with applicable policy departments and must comply with the provisions of the Planning Act. So they are very different than an MZO because there are rules that have to be followed very, very strictly. Next slide, please. So the developers. So the interesting part about the developers is that the developers may be different than the landowners. So these are the developers for the 12 parcels. In some cases, some of the names up here are going to ruffle some feathers because we have history in town. The reality is that of these particular ones, the developer is actually different than the owner, the landowner. So any one of these may have one of them has one landowner. The largest number is 67. There are 260 total landowners in these 12 parcels. So A6 is an interesting one. I'm just going to draw your attention to that. That's the Bolton North Landowners Group. It's on the left-hand column, the fourth one down. So when Al Axworthy, he was kind enough to reach out to me via email because he took a drive past between meeting 1 and meeting 2 and said, there's a gigantic Argo sign out on this piece of property. What gives? You said it was Bolton North Landowners Group, and that's not what that at the statutory meeting. So Argo is a landowner in that situation. The Bolton North Landowners Group is the person or the organization that put the application in or is about to submit the application into the process. So that's sort of how the work, if you want to know the names of all of the landowners, those range from the developer, like Argo on A6, to a small residential lot. It could be a grandparent. It could be a family farm. It could be any number of different type of landowner. Those are all available at the Land Registry Office. That's a provincial group. It is painful to go to Ontario, the Service Ontario, and get that information, but it is all publicly available if you're interested in a particular parcel to know how many landowners are actually part of that and who's there. All of the 12 parcels are inside the urban boundary or a previously identified settlement area. So nothing is outside of those areas. And you may remember if you were at our first meeting that there was contention around one of the maps and what was the issue with that. So the maps on here are not changed from the first meeting. The maps will all be updated before the bylaws are brought back to council, so they will then reflect all of the inputs that have come in with comments from every commenting group or individual. So that particular land snap, on the map, the maps are all drawn in layers. So to address that particular piece, that piece encroached on the 413 section, and was quite contentious. I can't remember which map it was on. So what was used on the original map that you see here was the original area that was identified for us to remember to hold. It's a big area. And the reality is the province has moved to a 50% line at this point, so they are that much closer to defining the precise location of the 413. And that is the reason for that. It's a similar process that we saw when the Greenbelt was first laid out. To be honest, when those maps were laid out, for some people, that land, that layer of map that was placed on, created a whole lot of headache because the first lines sometimes went through people's barns, sometimes went through their houses. Those were all corrected as part of the commenting process. It wasn't the fault of the original planners that came up with that by any means. It was the layer that was used. And then it was revised in order to ensure that no encroachment like that actually happened. Next slide, please. So the letters. So when I thanked Nicola publicly the last time for clarifying the question for us from the first meeting to the second, and I'll do that again. Thank you. And so the clarification of why were they kept from council and why, if they say share at a public meeting, weren't they? So that was the nature of the question, the clarification that Nicola provided to me afterwards. And so what happens with commenting letters? Because that's basically what the letters from both the region and from the ministry are. So they come into the building and they are forwarded to planning. This is the same thing that happens with comments from the TRCA, Credit Valley Conservation, Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Energy, a landowner. They all go into the process and they are synthesized into a gigantic document. And I'm going to show you on the next slide, for anyone who hasn't been here, an itemization of what happens when comments come in and how are they cataloged. And then I'll share how they come back in the final bylaws and how council gets them so that they can see all of them. So as you can expect, there are comments for, some are meh, and some are completely against. Conflicting comments always occur in a planning process. So one group may want one thing and another one may want another. So they come into our planning team, they are cataloged, and then the team starts to address them. And as I said, the bylaws will not come back until those particular pieces are resolved. Next slide. So when the process happened, the letter came in from the region, and I'll use that as an example. This is hard to read, so I'm going to read it out. By the time we had the second meeting, about 95% of the comments that had been identified by Minister Calandra's letter and the region had already been addressed through that process. There's lots more. Some of them have come in from you in meetings. Some of them have come in via electronic means and come from different agencies. So in this particular case, what you see on the screen right now, it is called a comments response matrix. Eric doesn't like me to call it boring, but I'm going to anyways. This is a very long process. So in this particular piece, in the column on the left-hand side, in this box that's on the screen, it says region comments. The middle one says town response, and then there are two next columns. So I'm going to read it out loud so that you can at least hear, if you can't read what's up here. This is an excerpted response. You can see at the bottom that the comment under town response is very long. It actually goes off the page. We couldn't get it in without making it so small that it would be completely illegible. So this is related to areas A1 to A9 and A11. The region comments, that's in the left column, says, the region advises that small areas in areas 4, 5, and 11 related to the proposed route of Highway 413 are identified as being outside the 2051 new urban area boundary. The town response, that's the longer one that you see on the screen. Alignment issues of the regional urban boundary with 1, the original Highway 413 preferred route, and 2, the new boundary from the 50% design prepared by the MTO. So that was the line that I was mentioning earlier. The intent was to map and zone up to the most up-to-date planned ROW, that's right-of-way, for the 413, with the holding provision in place in all the bylaws that for lands within the focused analysis area. Focused analysis area is what the province is calling the area where the 413 and the energy corridor are going to go. So that's their area for study. Clearance must be granted from the Ministry of Transportation with regards to the GTA West corridor / Highway 413 alignment. ZBA's zoning bylaw amendments for areas A4, A5, and A11 have corrected the boundaries of the lands in the new urban area. So that has been made. It's just not on the map here, but it is in the work that is being done and the new maps are being drawn. So the column that is the second from the right is said, is comment addressed as part of the zoning bylaw? That's yes. And then the final column, because it does apply to some, not in this instance though, is the comment to be addressed through related planning applications? That does not apply in this particular situation. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the progress to date, and the 95% mark was pretty quick. The reality is we go back and forth. to make sure that all parties are satisfied with the amendments that are being made in order for us to be able to move forward to bring the final bylaws in their form where these comments have been addressed. I have not updated the slide from the first meeting to the second meeting. Right before the meeting, we actually got another one that came in, so that's why it's referenced here. So the MTO sent their comments in that basically said, you can go ahead and process your applications inside that focused analysis area for the 413. So you can see we get different comments at different points along the way that we must address. So over time, as you know, the MTO is going to be working to refine that from a 50% to an even narrower one. So we did have a question at one point about what happens to that big giant list of comments. And so all of them come back to council. So whenever the bylaws come back, they will be there. So if it's not plentiful, it can be written straight into the council report. If there's a lot of them, and I don't know because I'm not dealing in that work, then an addendum is added on so that they all appear. So council gets every single one of them with the detail of what was it and how was it addressed through the process. Next slide, please. So holds. So lots of conversation about holds. It's not a new practice when it comes to the planning business. Holds have been in the planning industry for a very long time. It allows us to put an H on a map that basically prevents the shovels in the ground as we move forward until that's cleared. So they're used for servicing transportation restrictions like the 413, watershed concerns, and the concerns from the comments that we get from different parties. They're in all 12 of the bylaws, and they must be cleared before shovels go in the ground. Dead stop. The zoning bylaws are not in force, as the bottom one says, until all hold conditions have been satisfied and the holds have been removed by council following public notification. So there was also a question about, can strong mayor power be used to take the H off? So the removal of an H for a direct unilateral decision of the mayor to remove them, no way. That is not permitted under strong mayor powers. They can come back. They have to come to a vote of council. Votes of council can occur in this particular situation because of what I mentioned earlier, meeting the housing targets for the province in two manners. It can come back as regular process that you would be familiar with from the pre-strong mayor period, where it comes, the whole of council gets it, the details are all there, and then they vote and remove that H. The mayor can bring a motion or a notice for bylaw, or notice for motion to bring that forward to do a 1/3 vote. So there are two methods, but it is not a unilateral decision where she can simply say, nope, it's out the door. So the H can be, it's not a unilateral decision, so the mayor cannot just say, I want it gone, so it's gone. So so it has to be through a vote of council, and so strong mayor powers may afford her the opportunity, if she chose, to pass a motion to bring it as a bylaw to remove it, and then the net result of that vote would be a 1/3 majority. It can also come forward as the full regular, the regular majority vote that you would have as the whole of council. It is a piece of, so the question is just for the recording. The individual held up a phone with the Municipal Act itemized on it about what is it, and stated that what I just described was not included in that. So where am I getting my information from? So after last week, not last week, it was 2 weeks ago, the last meeting, when I said that I did not have a legal opinion on that. I'm sorry, I should have clarified that. So it is a legal interpretation that I was permitted to provide outside of an in-camera opportunity, because usually legal opinions are provided in those settings. And that legal opinion is the opinion that the strong mayor powers and the ability to bring forward that motion is included under the strong mayor provision, not the unilateral decision. It's a legal opinion. We don't. Questions we'll be doing it's a question because the individual is concerned that it's come from Loopstra Nixon, where on the beginning, I said we'd be addressing those pieces. We have had multiple legal opinions that are not restricted to Loopstra Nixon. And there is no difference in the opinion. Next slide, please. So holds, we're still in this conversation. So this is an example of what happens for the 413. What does a hold look like? So, and this, for anybody who, and I mentioned it earlier, there's an energy corridor that's going to run along the 413. For anyone who didn't know that, I apologize because that's just one more cut, and I get it. So alongside the highway, because of the width of that strip, then there's a planned energy corridor that is going to accompany the highway. So we are required to not only get clearance from the MTO, but the Ministry of Energy and Electricity now, I think is the new name as of last week. It was just the Ministry of Energy before. So in this particular, for this particular track, there are holds for the 413 in the 6 that you see up here. And for anyone who may not be able to see that, it's A1, A2, A4, 5, 9, and 11. The other key word on this slide, bottom line, says proposed. The reason why it says proposed is that holds and going back and forth with comments is really truly a collaborative process. The other part is the bylaws are not fixed in stone. So anything in the bureaucratic world is considered to be proposed until our council makes the decision, at which point that decision is considered final. So then we move to different language. So it's our language, just in case the idea of proposed made it sound like it was just something that we were either making up or we might change our minds on. It's not. That's how we work. We don't make a decision until council makes that for us. Next slide, please. So here are some examples for A1 to A9 and 11 and 12. So there are multiple holds in these particular bylaws. So secondary plan, draft plan of subdivision or a site plan control, development agreement with the region, and environmental impact study. Those are all H's and must all be removed before a shovel can go in the ground. Next slide, please. For 10, 10's a different one that has secondary plan and a noise mitigation report. So that's the one that's over right along Highway 50 in Bolton. So different type of environment, and that's why those elements are a little bit different. So last slide, next slide, please. So in summary, the reasons behind bringing forward the 12 zones, the rezoning for the 12 parcels of land is momentum. As we talked about, we're on about a 35-year pace to try to meet a 27-year goal. Some of these zones or some of these parcels will help us meet our 2031 housing pledge. Some of them are intended to provide a kickstart to the 2051 date. And as I mentioned earlier, the way that forecasting is changing, that 2051 target is a moving target for us until we hear from the province on how their numbers start to change in reflection of the immigration rates coming into Canada. We don't know what that looks like. So getting started and moving quickly is an important piece. The big picture comprehensive planning helps build better communities so that things really are interconnected, walkable, livable. We have, unfortunately, right now, fragmentation and disconnected pieces. So these 12 bylaws are designed to try to signal forward that the planning needs to be done on a much larger scale. Innovation and readiness. We had someone come to the first meeting and talk very openly about a report on Global News about how there's lots of empty places in the city of Toronto that nobody's moving forward on. Developers are not moving. Interest rates are high. So why do we need more places for people to live. The growth targets for us that have come from the region, that came from the province, because that's how it works, deliver us numbers that we have to move forward. So these particular bylaws bring forward and demonstrate to our development community that we are ready for them when they are, and that it's an innovative way of trying to move forward. Other municipalities are doing other things to try to demonstrate their readiness and their innovation. The better reputation for business, trying to get rid of the adversarial piece, and trying to be a little bit more cooperative moving forward so that we can limit or minimize or avoid the land tribunals and the costs that are associated with that. Servicing and transit, we touched on that. Planning them at scale, having it be more than a quiet signal, but a much louder one, that those larger scale plans need to be put in place in order to move forward, does give our partners that opportunity to be able to bring that instead of punting it down the road as they have in the past. And the incentive funding, I've mentioned that. We got the check from the province. We didn't get incentive funding from the feds. And we don't know the definitive reason why. What they told us informally was our plan was fantastic. It had everything in it. It actually was leading practice in a lot of respects, except for the transit. We didn't have transit. So they didn't say you didn't get it because you don't have transit. But when somebody tells you you have better practice, and I use better practice instead of best practice because that's always evolving, when you have that, but you still don't get the infrastructure funding, then there must be a reason why when they point out the piece around transit. Last but not least, Loopstra-Nixon. Did I miss slide 26? Aha, there we go. So, Quentin Nonabal from Loopstra-Nixon. He was a lead lawyer on bringing forward the 12 bylaws. He works for Loopstra-Nixon. Loopstra-Nixon is a leading firm in the areas of municipal law, land use planning, and development law. So firms in this field work for a host of different clients. There isn't a single one that works for one type of client and leaves the rest at the curb. So they represent municipalities, they represent developers, sometimes they represent landowners, and sometimes they represent public interest groups. This is the part that people don't like. The Law Society of Ontario dictates that every lawyer that you are ever going to encounter must go through a robust process to identify conflict and then provide a declaration and state that there is no conflict. So, Mr. Anabal has done that. He has gone through and identified no conflict, and that meets and satisfies the requirements of the town. So, the one last piece that I will provide to you around the Loopstra-Nixon, in terms of their ratio, I don't have the list of names of their clients. I'm not entitled to that because that is privileged information. What I do know is that they have acted on or act on currently more than 60 municipalities in the province of Ontario and fewer than 20 developers. So their mix, that is just one glimpse into the mix that they currently or have had. I'm going to turn it over to Eric so you can talk details.
Thank you, Janet. Let's adjust. Can you hear me? Yep. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of the planning process. My name is Eric Lusick. I'm the Commissioner of Planning and Economic Development here at the town. Up in front of you is a slide that really sort of outlines the planning process and how we ultimately move through these bylaws. The goal is improving and expediting Caledon's housing supply, as Janet had mentioned. We're also looking at investing in affordable, missing middle, and multi-unit housing. Community-related infrastructure to support the growth is also part of this. Some context, and very generally, there's lags between the starts of housing and ultimately when housing gets occupied, and this comes into effect when you're talking about timeframes or otherwise. One thing I really want to emphasize here, and Janet alluded to this earlier, is while you can see this looks like a successive process, and as you move through it, it's actually it's a concurrent process or tandem process, as Janet was mentioning. So you can come through and you can do various processes at the same time if they align as we move through the planning process. Next slide. So the areas in question, so the question is why these areas? So ultimately these lands have been identified through official plan. They're a logical extension of the current built up area. In many cases, they actually provide for the completion of an existing area. They help identify the growth plans that will demonstrate the need for rail service. And further, some of them include lands that are already part of existing OLT approvals or lands within MZOs, so municipal zoning orders. Next slide. Up here in front of you is our draft growth management and phasing plan that really shows how development is to proceed going forward in the town. I say draft because we haven't gotten to conclusion. We hope to complete this process shortly. It was stalled in November as we moved through some additional processes. Most of these areas that we're talking about today, the 12 strong mayor bylaw areas, are part of phase one, which is really identified as growth through 2036. Well, there's a couple that are part of phase two, but that's more of a broad use, 2036 to 2051. And we're taking on some of the early parts of that phase two growth since we were planning for basically 20 years of growth or more. Next slide, please. We've put this slide up to emphasize that this is a lot of the information we're discussing today is not necessarily brand new. There has been past planning for many of these areas already at the town. So if you'll notice on the column on the left, because it might not be easy to read, but some of these areas include the South Albion Bolton study, the Brez study for options 1, 2, and 3, Mayfield West, and MZO option 3 for 171/21. So these are related to the applications, and the applications that we're talking about today are listed in the table next to it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this as we want to ultimately get through this and get to your questions. Next slide, please. So these are the 12 areas and applications that have been under review. So it gives you a bit of an idea as we talk about, you know, there is work underway, but there's also some fairly detailed work underway for some of these areas. So they can be things like in A1, for example, the secondary planning, rezoning, and subdivision work at the park stage. So that's the planning application review committee stage. So work is underway, but it's not to the point where it's approved. I'm not going to run through all 12 of them, so let's move on. In March of this year, the Town Council approved the official plan, which is Future Caledon. Currently it rests with the Region Appeal for final approval, and ultimately that will be passed on to the province as well. But what we wanted to do is actually identify and show you that the official plan identified these lands for growth. It's pretty clear growth has been identified. There are new community areas, urban centers, primary major transit station areas, often referred to as MTSAs, existing urban areas, potential urban centers, designated greenfield areas, and delineated built-up areas. I know it's very difficult to see the tiny maps from where you're sitting there, so apologies. Yeah, so these slides will be available following the meeting. Past presentation slides are available, and the official plan can be looked up online too. Next slide, please. So we're getting a little into the densities. So we've talked about the need to accommodate population growth here in Caledon. Substantial growth in population is coming to the town. This slide, at least along the bottom, you'll see the different areas in question and the densities being proposed. Some of them you'll see are much larger than others. Densities, for example, for A10 and A12 are notably higher, and this has to do with their location related to potential major transit station areas. Those are the MTSAs that I just referenced, as well as conceptual neighborhood centers. So the official plan actually identifies these, and they really identify the need for population and employment growth being concentrated in these areas. There's things like higher densities will ultimately allow for the maximization of transit. It improves upon accessibility. The policies are there. to foster denser mixed-use development, and among a number of other good planning goals. Next slide, please. You'll see on this slide, this is the mix of the different types of housing that's proposed. So in orange, you'll see singles and semis. In yellow, townhomes. Green is multis or apartments. So it's different than a lot of the current mix you're seeing in Caledon. A good proportion of the new growth will result in medium densities, and the growth is not just single detached housing that will be built. And again, I recognize it's difficult to read, but so again, orange is singles, semis, yellow is townhomes, and green is multis or apartments. So you can see certain areas have more than the other. Next slide, please. One of the things that is important to emphasize is that what we're doing through this process does not end. Secondary planning will continue. It is a key part of the planning process, and identified up here, you will see lists of the various types of studies that still have to be done for these various areas. There's quite a bit of detail, and this process still has to occur. As part of that, ultimately, public engagement will be crucial. There will be public sessions to discuss them. Next slide, please. This slide demonstrates a new schedule in the OP that provides a comprehensive foundation for secondary planning and development in the urban system. The preliminary community structure plan was prepared based on this plan and town master plan documents to identify the general locations of developable areas and community defining elements. This community structure plan incorporates things like the town structure, centers or nodes, corridors, natural features and areas, conceptual collector road network, existing and planned parks and community facilities, and including things like fire stations and active trails. The town will be updating these figures based on the revised master plans and ultimately input from groups like the school boards or the approved secondary plans. Next slide, please. On here is what you get with growth often. So community infrastructure comes with growth. So you can see we're looking at upwards of 50 neighborhood parks and amenity areas, 3 community parks, which are larger parks than neighborhood parks, 16 elementary or high school areas, schools, not areas, 3 fire stations, and this is a draft estimate of the infrastructure that you will see coming with these new areas. Next slide, please. Getting a little deeper into the type of land uses we're talking about, mixed-use zoning is really what's being put forward. So when I say mixed-use zoning, it's various forms of use that can be commercial, residential, other uses that work well with one another. So really, we often say it's flexible, it's innovative, it's a modern approach to planning. It integrates various uses, promotes walkability and density, and creates vibrant, sustainable communities that are age-friendly and inclusive. The secondary planning will involve subdivision plans as well as design guidelines to ensure compatibility compatibility, harmony of uses, and not separation of uses. Next slide, please. So ultimately, there are many tools that create complete communities. Zoning bylaw is just one of them. The tools also include things like official plan policies that support the creation of healthy and complete communities, secondary plan policies that create distinct, resilient, and complete communities, tertiary plans, sometimes referred to as community block plans, that establish a context for coordinated development. Then we get down into plans of subdivision and site plans to ensure detailed elements of complete communities. At a higher level, we have town-wide design guidelines that support compact design and mix of uses and densities along a connected new network of streets for complete communities. We have community design guidelines, which also include architectural control guidelines and area-specific urban design briefs, which help ensure for good urban design and open space objectives. Green development standards and active transportation master plans are also part of this. Next slide, please. Affordable housing is something that often comes up in these discussions. You'll see on the slide the housing continuum at the bottom of the screen. This is a policy that's already been brought in place through our future Caledon official plan. Ultimately, this plan still needs approval. Secondary plan and subdivision process, as well as site plan approval, in some cases, allow us to get to these matters. So This can be through entering agreements between the town and developer to secure affordable housing. So each of the 12 bylaws has provisions added to permit non-market housing, additional residential units, and multiplexes to broaden the type and range of housing options that are affordable to various income groups. This process of pre-zoning will provide surety to the development industry and ensure the affordable housing projects do not have to go through the site-specific rezoning, and this therefore can apply for provincial or federal funding sooner. Next slide, please. We're often spending a lot of the time talking about residential here today, but there's more than residential. We're also talking about employment and ensuring that there's a balanced approach. So our focus is on attracting investment that makes sense for Caledon, that ultimately aligns with the town's vision for growth, protecting the green spaces and natural assets. A balanced approach to growth that prioritizes employment land development with residential development is critical. We want to continue promoting our highly educated workforce, our strategic location within the GTA, and land development opportunities as key advantages of locating here in Caledon. Next slide, please. These are the maps that, this is the collection, an index slide here that shows A1 to A12, the areas that are in discussion. The maps at the back of the room will actually show you the slightly more detail. So I'd encourage you to have a look if you've not already had a look. Next slide, please. As part of growth, we can't forget some of the services that help lead to the growth. So we put this slide in here on behalf of our friends at the Region Appeal that identifies planned water infrastructure through to 2041. Again, I know it's very difficult to see. What it is that the region's working on advancing infrastructure to support these development lands. It's where water is planned to go through 2041, and the current DC plan at the region had this information and provided this. Next slide, please. We're also at the region dealing with wastewater infrastructure, and this map identifies where the wastewater infrastructure will go. Next slide, please. We wanted to show this slide and this concept of what development could occur in the Bolton area, more particularly A10, and it's one scenario that is showing the densities that are needed to help support transit investment. So on February 21st, there was a public open house to address the vision and planning alternatives at the Bolton secondary plan. Potential modeling is alternative 1 as shown here. And there's a feasibility study on the provision of GO service that is being undertaken by Metrolinx right now. The official plan permits a maximum of 150 people and jobs for a major transit station area, and that's what we're effectively showing here. In order to better understand what is appropriate given the permitted heights, some preliminary modeling was done, as you're seeing. And it's important to note that while modeling helps to understand better an area to be developed, it's really only a demonstration of what could happen. You know, most things don't get designed in square blocks like that. And that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to our Commissioner of Finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Cummings, Commissioner of Finance, as Mr. Lusich said. The first slide here, we're looking at how to finance some of this. This is a slide on development charges and the revenue forecasted based on the growth forecast. So development charges, for those of you who do not know, are fees charged to new development to pay for the increased infrastructure required to support that development. Follows kind of the model of growth paying for growth. So as you can see on the chart there, has the forecast and then for residential and for non-residential, showing a 10-year number of about $1 billion of revenue coming in for development charges. The $1 billion in terms of revenue coming in is actually built on the costs or the project work required to support the development going in. So it takes all the projects, community parks, roads, fire stations, libraries, puts a price tag on them, adds them all up and divides by the number of units coming in, and that's how you actually get the revenue. So that's how it all works out. The development charge background study, which was passed recently, is located on our website and has a full list of all the projects going out to 2041 on there. That's just the town side. There is the regional side. As you saw a couple of slides ago, there was water and wastewater. That new water and wastewater lines is covered by the regional development charge. So that's how that's looking. And then if you go out far enough, you're actually looking at about 2.65 in new infrastructure and supporting development to help out with the new development forecast coming forward. May I get the next slide, please? So as the new development or as new residential units are occupied and new employment lands are filled up, new taxes come in from these areas. And that new tax base that comes in is theoretically in place to support the replacement and maintenance of that new infrastructure that they built with the development charges. So if we go out with nothing else really taken into consideration here, just a straight tax right now, we'd be looking at 145 million a year in taxation coming in, and if we go at another 10 years, jumps up to almost 200 million in tax revenue coming in to support that new infrastructure coming in place. So that's kind of what's in place in terms of the development and the development charges paying for the growth coming in, and of course with the taxation comes in, that's about 145 million every year once that's up. Thank you.
So I have a set of questions that were gathered at the beginning, and I've asked Robert to stay up here because the first one is tied to money. So, and this is a bit of crystal ball, to be honest. If all of these projects are completed, how much money will Caledon receive from provincial and or federal governments?
It's a good question because who else can help us? But I mean, we have the Development Charges Act in place, which basically is there to serve in lieu of any grants from anybody else for the development that's coming in. So development is paying for development. That being said, we do very well in our grant applications for the maintenance and replacement costs. I believe we're in about the $7.5 million this year through a number of different grants that we receive, and we use that for roads resurfacing, trail maintenance, different forms of capital replacement that we need over the lifespan of the assets. There was the Building Faster Fund, so we did receive money from that by hitting a target pledge of housing. That amount of, I think it was 2.8 million, the regulation has not dropped, or I have not seen the regulation in terms of what the eligible expenses are for that, but certainly that would be a small piece that would help out with this.
Thank you. You may go. Last meeting, there were a lot of finance questions, so you're off the hook for now, but no guarantees. So Eric, I'm going to call you back up because there's a number of questions that are specific to some of the code designations on the legends for the maps. So so Carmen's going to come up. So just to get in, to get into the detail of what some of these terms mean, because we've talked about a lot of them, but without the explanation, it just may not make sense. So the first one is what does settlement area boundary expansion mean?
So, hi, I'm Carmen Caruso. I'm Manager of Development. Yep. So, settlement area boundary expansion, that's just the area where we want to see growth in the town. So, many of you have heard of SABE, so settlement area boundary expansion. That study has happened over the past few years. And through that study, we've determined and implemented through the official plan the areas that we want to see growth. So that's essentially what the settlement area boundary is. It's a built-up area and the future built-up area of the town.
Okay, next one. So on the maps, there are two that are EPA, so EPA 1 and EPA 2. The environment policy areas. So could you help us better understand what environmental policy area means?
So essentially, environmental policy area are just areas that we want to either have no development in that area at all, or limit it to whether it be flood protection or flood mitigation measures. So those are areas where you don't really see a lot of, or any development whatsoever.
So this one is related to, what's the difference between, there's two designations for commercial on a lot of the maps. One is CC, which is core commercial, and the other one is just a C, which is general commercial. So could you explain the difference between core commercial and general commercial areas, please?
It's a bit of a tough question because I don't have the zoning in front of me. If I remember correctly, commercial, core commercial and commercial are very similar, are almost exactly the same. I think the main difference, if I remember correctly, is core commercial does not permit a drive-through. So restaurants would be allowed in both, clinics, business offices, those types of uses would be allowed. I think the main difference is that the drive-through component is not allowed in a core commercial area.
Okay, and the last one on the codes is the residential designation. So there are, there's an R2, which is residential 2. There's RMD, which is mixed density residential. And both of them, so we're looking for clarification on what does mixed density residential mean, what's included in that. And there's one called RM multiple residential area. Could you give us some clarity about the difference between RM and mixed density, please?
So residential mixed density is pretty much any type of housing is permitted on that, in that zone. So from singles, semis, towns to apartments. Residential multiple or multiple residential, that only allows apartment buildings in that zone. And no other uses.
Okay, perfect. You're off the hook for now. Thank you. Question for the mayor. So the question is, does the mayor commit to not using strong mayor powers in any way to remove the holds on the applications and bylaws?
And tonight I'm not prepared to answer that question, but you'll have an answer later on in the process.
Okay, so just for the sake of the recording, at this time, the mayor's not prepared to have an answer. I does not have an answer tonight, but will have an answer through the process. And this one is for Eric. So what public transportation, and schools are currently or will be planned for development in Bolton?
Thanks for the question, Janet. I don't actually have that answer. I'm not sure if we have that detail. I don't think we're there yet. That would come through the secondary planning process. So we don't have that detail, but that will come through a later planning process.
Perfect, thank you. So that's the end of my cue card questions. We have a mic in the middle of the room for anyone who has questions that they'd like to pose for any of our staff members or for the mayor. If you'd like to line up, if you could, this is not a statutory public meeting, so if you could, we'd really appreciate focus on your question and one follow-up, and then if you have another question, to please allow the next person who has a question to ask theirs and re-line up at the back so that everyone who has something that they want to raise can do so.
Yes.
Mr.
Does
Sinclair.
the mic work? Good. I'm interested in the what will trigger a second public information meeting. I had my count. I found 7 major omissions of providing relative information for the public to make an understanding of what's being proposed at the first public information meeting. And so what triggers a second one? Is it important new information? major changes to plans, whatever, timing. So when are we going to have a second public information meeting, and is there consideration also of breaking out each individual of the 12s, have a separate public information for them?
So you're speaking actually and asking about the statutory public meeting as opposed to a public information meeting like we're having right now. So it's
This is more like an open house.
Okay, so it's semantics then. So Eric, could you come up and address that for us?
So on April 25th, we held the public meeting that's required under the Planning Act. If we were to have to hold that session again, as you mentioned, there'd have to be a substantial change to what is being proposed. And with respect to the 12, we are going to be bringing them as separate reports. So I think that answers.
Well, there was inadequate information as required under the Planning Act at the first statutory meeting. So I really think you have the onus to hold another one with all the proper information available. Right? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
Yes. My first question I asked at the first meeting is, when will the province, have you heard from the province yet? Because they give you a 3-month window when they're going to notify when they approve the official plan. Have you heard anything from them yet? Because we can't approve any zoning whatsoever, correct? And I guess why I'm asking is, we need to do the rest of the zoning, especially for the employment lands that we have not outside of these 6 that you're bringing forward, right? So you probably can't start that zoning until you get it approved by the province, correct?
Eric?
Thank you for the question. Very good question. So right now, the official plan rests with the Region Appeal. We have, as I think it's been alluded to at past discussions, we're going through a period with the transition of the Region Appeal. So we're seeking that clarification about what's going to happen, whether the region will continue to be an approval agency for that, or whether it will be the province. That we're hoping to figure out. But as you're correct, it was like I believe you can't enact the zoning until the OP comes in play, because then it would conflict with the official plan.
Correct. Can we do the other zoning? Can we start that now or have you started the other zoning to hire someone to do the zoning for the other lands?
You referring to
Within the official plan, within the growth?
So what would happen is a very good question. A comprehensive zoning bylaw review is typically what follows once you have official plan
Correct.
information in place. Sometimes you'll wait for applications to come in. We're looking at ways to do that, whether there's alternatives, some of the modern processes that the Planning Act now provides us with. That's part of our next steps for looking at this.
Okay. All right. I have other questions, but I'll give everybody a chance.
Thank you.
I'll start with my question first, and then I'll provide a bit of the context. The fact that we have a lot of questions at every single information session indicates interest from the community. And I would take that a little bit further to say maybe not the full confidence that we've got everything figured out and what we need to for 2031. So my question has to do with how you will increase resident confidence in this plan. My husband and I have been doing the whole entire tour of all the information sessions, and I will say that at the outset, there was lots of talk about being proactive with the plan. I fully agree. I'm not anti-development or growth, because that absolutely is necessary. But I don't really have the confidence that the town is moving proactively for a number of reasons. The information session that was statutory back in April was lacking. Janet, you've been very upfront in stating that lack of information has led to, first, the planning of 3 information sessions and then a 4th one in Alton. And the number of these sessions, they've been incrementally better. We've been getting piecemeal information that does help increase that confidence. However, this is the biggest plan that Caledon has ever seen in the undertaking in a very short period of time. And I'm not sure all of us are completely confident that it's not been a reactive approach. The information sessions, the information that's been provided has all been reactive based on how we as residents have been asking and seeking for that information, and a lot of the questions continue to be asked tonight. I'm not going to tackle the planning because that's not my background, but Kate, if you can go to slides 50 and 51, it's actually for Mr. Cummings around the finance. Mr. Cummings, I do have a finance background as well, so I can keep up with you. So does my husband. Probably not the same degree that you do. I think the numbers for revenue look amazing. And previously in a session, it was asked about whether or not we could see the projected expenses. And the response back was, you're not able to take a crystal ball and look that far to say what expenditures are. But I think it would give everyone else a bit more confidence as taxpayers to say what is going to be the implication of these really large plans that we've got. You know, it was done for this year's budget. Everyone's been told 6% increase at a estimated property of about $670,000. That's going to be about $300 worth of tax. Most of us have properties that are valued at more than $670,000. So I think there is a real concern about the bottom line and what this entire plan is going to impact us bottom line. And so I'm hoping that you can address that question. Maybe it is just me, because I do have a finance background, but I think the others would like to know too, what's it going to cost us in the end for all these amenities that you're trying to proactively plan for? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Certainly, with your finance background, you know that uncertainty is the biggest thing that we contend with on a regular basis. So in dealing with that, we draw up assumptions, we draw up things that we can try to deal with in real time. Going out 10 years, it becomes very foggy about what's coming in. These forecasts ask to provide some numbers based on the numbers coming in, and it's based on existing tax rates right now. As we know, taxes typically go up just with the inflationary issues. So, 3.5%, 4% on any given year. If you do the math and spread that forward, you're probably coming pretty close just to maintain our existing asset base, okay? And as you add new infrastructure, you're looking for new residents to come in and create additional taxes for that. Now, that is a moving target. The best we can do is look to a 1 to 3 year estimate and forecast, and that's what we're planning on doing. But in terms of giving you all the confidence in the world that these numbers are going to hold over the next 10 years, well, we all know what an estimate is. Some of them will be right, some of them will be short, some of them will be more. I'd say that the nice thing about the model or the simplicity of the development charges is that if the growth is coming in, then the development charges are coming in and you are financing successfully the development that needs to happen. If the growth is not coming in and you're not receiving those funds, well then you don't really have a need to build those roads to nowhere if there's no growth. So there's an ebb and flow to it, but that's kind of the safety net around development charges. I would also state that if you're not putting the infrastructure in, well then you don't need to increase the new tax base to pay for the maintenance and replacement of that because it's not going to exist. So a lot of this revolves all around the actual development that comes to the door and the construction that actually happens. So I appreciate your question. We have a good finance team that's looking at how to do this going forward, but really it's as development comes to the door going forward and our planning plans going forward in terms of putting the development in the ground. But thank you for your question.
I think the follow-up is, for my question is, you know what, even if you can project a little bit against inflation, bottom line is it's just too much left up in the open to say we can only project 1 to 3 years. You can simply use inflation rate at 2.7% or even increase it to 3%. Be good to really see bottom line how many cents and dollars that actually means. And I know you can always put a little asterisk or some assumptions to make it really simple for the others, just to have that level of confidence that we're not signing up for something right now that 10 years from now isn't going to be sustainable and it's going to end up really hurting the taxpayers, whether they be existing or new ones coming in. Thank you.
Hi. I'm going to try and make my 3 very brief questions very ultra brief. So the first one is, you've made mention that in Caledon, only the mayor can request the release of a hold by way of the 1/3 vote at council. And there are municipalities that have senior staff, such as a chief or a head of planning, that have been given delegated authority to remove a holding. I'm wondering if the town of Caledon has such an individual, and or if there is an intention to have somebody like that on staff in the future.
Eric, you would be the chief planner, but the answer is a blunt no.
Okay, perfect. And then to piggyback on that question, I understand that according to your schedule for each project, we're all at different places, and I appreciate that you've given us the time and the consideration for that. I'm wondering if you can address if a project or a zoning, or one of the plans is underway and we hit, say, the point that there is an environmental concern. Is there at any point the ability to request to lift that hold in the middle of the process, or does that have to be followed all the way through? So for instance, we're doing an environmental assessment of a project. We know that many of those already have a hold for a secondary plan, and that's part of the secondary plan. So in the event that we arise at something that, say, is an environmental concern, can there be a vote to just lift that portion of the secondary plan midway?
So just one H being removed specific to the environmental protections,
Or any?
or any. Eric, is that a no? That's a no, so it's,
Okay.
you can't, all the holds must be removed.
And then my final question is, also in the secondary plan, you make mention that there is consultation with Indigenous stakeholders. I'm wondering if you can give an example of a recent example of some of that Indigenous stakeholder conversation that's been taking place on any of these pieces of property.
Eric or Carmen, would you be able to come forward?
Thank you for the question. Through our official plan, there was extensive Indigenous consultation. So that's how we do it. We do it at the OP level, and then once we get down to the secondary and subdivision plan level, that will continue as well.
And so there's record of that?
Yes, for the OP, yes.
Just for the sake of the recording, the question from the floor was, is there a record of the Indigenous engagement for those processes? And the answer was yes. Next question.
Section 3412 of the Ontario Planning Act says that before passing a bylaw, the council shall ensure that sufficient information and material is made available to enable the public to understand generally the zoning proposal that has been considered by the council. I'm just would like to generally make a statement that that has not occurred. There are developments here, including A8, that we know nothing about. For pre-application, in terms of notice requirements under the Planning Act, there should be signage at all of those locations in your proposed zoning bylaw. Drove by there today just to double check that I hadn't missed a sign. No sign. I don't believe notice was given under the 120 meters to adjacent landowners required under the Planning Act. 1,000 meters passed by the town of Caledon. Didn't happen. The other thing that didn't happen was an open house, which is required to be held no later than 7 days before the public meeting. So you haven't fulfilled the requirements of the Planning Act to provide notice to us, and this process needs to restart. There should be 12 separate open houses so we can actually get information so that we can so that we're able to understand. I would also like to say, I've been paying attention to development in Caledon for 15 years. Every single application on our website will have the agency comments there for the public to see. So yes, there's a matrix that explains it, but we're actually kind of smart enough to understand. And the Region Appeal specifically asked that those 12 letters be made available to the public. And perhaps one of the reasons that they're not is because they expressed the very real concern. And I was also at every single BRES meeting at the region, in Bolton. I was at all of them. I spoke, I delegated. The reason a lot of those projects didn't go through is because of the cost of the infrastructure, particularly the water and wastewater. And in one of those letters from the Region of Peel, it said that the projected cost of just water and wastewater for Caledon's existing housing pledge of $13,000 is $13 billion. That does not include the $35,000. So when we say we're upset about this, Janet, at the last meeting, you said you couldn't afford to live in Caledon.
Yes.
And you're on the sunshine list, and I know how much you make. That is well above the average salary of the people of Caledon. So yeah, we're upset about this. We can't afford to pay for this. Nobody is answering our questions. I don't even believe it's been costed what these 35,000 homes are going to cost for the water and wastewater, let alone everything else. But I would project in the tens of billions of dollars. And don't you think you should have that information as to what it's going to cost, who's going to pay for it? Because I'm telling you, I can't work anymore. And I think most of the people here are already struggling with the cost of living. To go ahead with this fiscally irresponsible plan is why we're upset about it. But you are not following the provisions of the Planning Act. You violated the notice and information provisions, and this process needs to restart.
Thank you.
I'm not sure who wants to take this question, but, my name's Joanna Valeriani. I missed the last 3 sessions, but I listened. And to be perfectly honest, every session has changed, but what hasn't changed is the verbiage coming from town staff. The fact that we don't have a budget, I don't care that you can't predict what's coming in 10 years, but I think you could tell me what the 5-year plan is, and then we can move from there. So I see that, we have numbers up there that's saying we could project this revenue, but I can't tell you how much money we're spending. That's like Trudeau saying the budget will balance itself. It's not happening. It hasn't happened. So I find that very disappointing. I didn't mean to be funny. That's actually disturbing, right? My taxes go up. We pay them. We keep paying them. I have not received an increase in services, and I don't expect to anymore. We are spending money we don't have. We're hoping the province will come in. We're hoping the feds will come in. We just don't know is what I keep hearing. We don't know how to answer that. We don't have that information. We'll try and get it for you next time. What you're planning here is in the billions of dollars. In April, that information should have been available to the public, and it wasn't. So I want to go to your slide 20, I believe it is, and ask my question from there. There were 12 letters from the Region of Peel. There was a letter from Minister Calandra that came in after our meeting. Those letters that came in from the Region of Peel, you had a slide up there where you showed us how you broke that down. Is that posted now on the town website where I can find it easily enough when I look up these 12 applications?
The letter or the specific
letters
comments?
And the specific comments.
The letter is not. The specific comments will be itemized once they have all been processed.
So you still haven't processed them. And we're having information meetings where I keep hearing we don't have that information. So maybe these 4 meetings were premature.
The process to address comments is ongoing at this point, and the
Well,
bylaws
we only
won't.
have 4 sessions, and then that's it. So we're having more? Are
No.
we going to have another public information meeting?
No,
To
there's no
So
more
the-
public information
That's right.
meetings.
So today, this is it.
The items of that are dealing with comments are in the point of being resolved. So the liaison back and forth between the commenter, in this case the region, and the town is ongoing and is happening until there is resolution on each of those comments. So we won't be posting the comments and the resolution until there's a resolution.
So the Region Appeal had no problem sending me those 12 letters, but the town of Caledon, where I pay taxes, does. Yes or no? So it's really that simple.
I have no idea if
There's
the region sent you the letters.
There's no transparency from the town of Caledon. That's the problem we've had from day one. I'm going to move along because we're not getting answers. I want to go back to conflict of interest. I'm not going to go into it too deeply. When I spoke on and delegated through those 7 hours and I listened to people. When I asked the question about conflict of interest, there was 2 members from Loopstra Nixon sitting next to me. Not one of them opened their mouths. Someone comes along later, a little more insistent, and then suddenly they have an answer. But their answer wasn't that there was no conflict of interest. They felt they had sufficiently cleared what could be a conflict of interest, but they didn't say there wasn't one. And if you want to go back to, you have a slide there about the Bolton North Hill Landowners Group. Quinto Annibale does represent them. You can look it up. You just put his name and the Landowners Group. It comes up. Since 2020. Their mailing address is his offices. So I'm not understanding how A6 and that lawyer are not a conflict of interest. You go to the Law Society and they will tell you, you cannot be there for the applicant, you cannot be there for a plaintiff if you're on the other side. It doesn't work that way. They have to be held to a higher standard. And I'm very disappointed that the town of Caledon didn't do its research. You took the word, I sent emails, Eric responded, and in not so many words, you were satisfied. I'm still not. And there has been no satisfaction on that question of conflict of interest. If this went to the Law Society, there'd be a big problem. You just have to Google the lawyer's name to see the controversy that's already there. But wipe that away. Just simply put Town of Caledon, Quinto Annibale. Town of Caledon, Quinto Annibale, Bolton North Landowners Group. And the Bolton North Landowners Group, if you go on the town website and you get very creative and try to find them, it's easier to do it with a Google search. The developers are listed there. Argo is not one of them, so they must be a landowner outside of the Bolton North Landowners Group. So that information you brought forward today is not correct. He only represents, I believe there's 8 of them. If people want to know, I can tell you because I've been looking at this since April. And for anyone who's interested, there's been so many emails. Here they are. It's on the application. Bolton North Hill Landowners Group. There's 8 sections in that group. Pacific owns Section 1. Polzanelli owns Section 2. Pacific owns Section 3. Country Homes owns Section 4, Oakbank Estates is Section 5, Marhome Ventures is 6, Georgian Humberville Inc. is 7, and Cold Creek Developments is 8. That has not changed. They might have sub-companies, because that's how developers work, but this is all on the town website, and I couldn't find it easy enough when this proposal for these 12 applications came through. And you still can't, because when we go to the page where all of this is being discussed, after tomorrow, we'll have 4 of your presentations, and that's it. So there is no information to the public. Our public information meeting was 7 hours long because people were outraged for not getting information. So I'm seriously asking, when will we have this information? And I don't want to hear, we don't know. There has to be an end game. There's going to be a meeting possibly in September where someone's going to decide that we're going to push all these through, or maybe 7 of the 12, or who knows what we're going to do. And there's no information today. It's been 6 weeks. You have to have something. We're not even getting crumbs.
If
You can answer.
we'll certainly be taking and re-reviewing the video. If I say to you that I don't have the answer, I don't. So we'll re-review your,
So we had a public information meeting with no information, and today we still have no answers. That's all I wanted to say.
thank you.
Hello, Karen Hutchinson. Couple of follow-up questions from other meetings. Has there been any word on the transition report that you said was due at the end of May from the Peel Transition Committee? And when do you expect to have that? Because as we know, that has a massive impact on everything we do with the roads and the wastewater, and council's resolution that they would object to that? And when do you expect to have that?
I have no expectations. We do not have information that has even been submitted.
Has the transition team submitted information to the province, or you don't know that?
We don't know.
How would we find that out?
I don't know, because we don't know. The province made it clear that they are not going to potentially make it public, and we have no information that it's even gone in. We have nothing, unfortunately.
Okay. Next was, Mr. Cummings mentioned that there's an asset management plan going to an approval body at the end of June from the town of Caledon. Could you just elaborate on that? And I'm wondering if that will answer some of the questions. I think you said that at the last meeting, you answered one of my questions. An asset management plan?
Yes, so all municipalities are required to file an asset management plan as per the legislation. So the town of Caledon has updated theirs for 2024 and brought it to general committee last Tuesday.
Okay.
Yeah, and for council approval at the next council meeting. The plan is large, there's a lot of information there, but essentially what it does is it looks at how municipalities have managed their assets over a lifetime to date. And what it is actually, is very revealing for how we manage our assets going forward. So, it seems that there's a bit of what we call an infrastructure gap. So the amount of money that we're collecting to maintain and replace infrastructure is a little bit shy of actually replacing that infrastructure. So it really comes down to a level of service, a risk acceptance, or do you need more funds? So the first part of this, or maybe the mid part of this, because the first asset management plan came forward a couple of years ago. It really comes down to focusing a municipality's resources on how to deal with their aging infrastructure. The town of Caledon's in fairly good shape with the relative newness of a lot of our infrastructure, but there's still a portion of it that is deemed in the beyond poor section. So yes, that's before council, and it meets the requirements of all the municipalities that are doing it this year. Next steps after that is to use that asset management plan and the inputs from it and do a number of things. Sharpen data, make sure that we have the data that's most up to date. Look at options in terms of how to reduce that infrastructure gap. And when I say infrastructure gap, I am speaking basically dollars and cents, or remove the service. So that's things that we need to look at going forward, and it will have an impact going forward.
Okay, thank you. And will that be then on the town's website?
Yes.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay. And do you, in your professional opinion, do you think that that's an early warning sign of what I talked to you last meeting about, the City of Toronto identifying over the next 10 years a $26 billion infrastructure maintenance gap, and saying that they would not be able to support any new infrastructure projects because of that? And we all know that the City of Toronto is a much more mature city, as you've just said, that Caledon has a lot of new infrastructure. But are you concerned about this early warning sign that there is already a gap in the infrastructure dollars and cents?
That's a great question. There's so many variables there. Am I concerned? I'm concerned every morning when I wake up. It's the nature of the gig. But let's talk about asset management for a second. And I mean, this isn't a new problem. It's been developing for 50, 60 years. Placing infrastructure into a municipality that perhaps at the time they didn't have the right estimates going forward or the right plans to go forward. The information we provide you is, the simple analysis going forward. But in terms of, what's it cost to maintain a kilometer of road over the lifespan of that road is information that municipalities now have more access to. So yeah, I am concerned. I'm not so concerned about the new development going in because that's more of a management strategy that's up to date going forward.
That's a problem for 20 years from now.
Yes. No, not necessarily. You cannot start putting away, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. So, I mean, I don't look at it as we're not kicking this down the road, it's something we have to deal with on an ongoing basis. That's why when I point out when the development comes in, those are new tax dollars coming in.
Right.
We should have an eye to those new tax dollars, that they should be going towards the replacement and maintenance of that new infrastructure that's going in. Because at some point, 50 years down the road, you're gonna have to replace some of that, or upgrade it along the way.
So
The key for us is to catch up with the old stuff.
Right, and so I would expect that your budgeting would include that, if we could see it going forward, that there would be a category for maintenance.
Absolutely,
Of
there
all
is,
this
yes. And the asset management plan talks about a few strategies to reduce that gap. They're just suggestions, but it's what a number of different municipalities are looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Before you ask your question, I would like just to apologize to you for failing to answer your question from any measure at the Albion Bolton Community Center. I know you left frustrated the last time. I hope we can do better. I will not make any guarantees to you, but I wanted to publicly acknowledge that that happened to you and share that apology with you publicly.
You know, that's very kind, and honestly, I really appreciate that. I did not leave frustrated. I'm sorry if it was perceived that way, but yeah, I did come here for this other meeting here to re-ask the question, and I actually had some time to think about it and truncate it to make sure that we're getting the information we need. What is the benefit of zoning before we have finalized secondary plans? Holding permits, like, it's irrelevant. All of the other details, we've done it before, irrelevant. Ajax. What is the benefit? Has there been any financial analysis, net present value, time savings? What is the benefit of zoning before we have finalized secondary plans? Thank you.
Is there any financial piece that has been done on that, Robert? No? Okay, growth pays for growth. So,
Well, if nobody wants to answer,
no, just if you give me a second.
okay. Yeah.
And so at the root of all of it is to allow for infrastructure to be planned and to signal readiness to an industry that we need to partner with in order to deliver on housing goals. That answer may not satisfy people in the room. It may not satisfy, it may satisfy some, I don't know. But that, at the end of the day, that is as direct an answer as I can provide you. So the question is, why is the planner not answering that question? Just for the record, that's the part of the information that I presented at the beginning of the slides. As well, Eric reiterated it partway through his section. So I took the question because it was in the section that I presented. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I do. First of all, Janet, right?
Yes.
Sorry. I very much, I actually really appreciate the apology. I didn't expect that. And no, it's very kind. But my follow-up to that is, it seemed like everybody was pretty timid to answer that question. And I would say, councilors, what is the benefit of zoning before we have finalized secondary plans? Can you guys answer that? Because you're voting on it.
This session hasn't been set up to put a counselor on the spot to ask.
Okay.
And so, but they will have an opportunity when the bylaws come back to be able to address that, because that's part of the process. But we don't want to put them on the spot right now. That's not fair.
That's not fair. No problem. Thank you.
I think that's what you might call a rhetorical question these days.
Which part of it?
That. So this question is actually, it's going to be a bit of a preamble, and I would like to direct this to Mayor Groves. So regarding these 12 strong mayor's zoning orders, over the last month, I think we have come to understand more about that, specifically that the growth management and phasing plan has not been completed and it has not been approved by council. That the secondary plans have not been approved or finished or approved by council. And that furthermore, the regional official plan, Caledon's official plan, both require that the growth management phasing plan and the secondary plan be approved before rezoning. So that's kind of a preamble. I've also come to understand that in the absence of staff reports, so when this arrived on March 26th, there were no staff reports. So we had absolutely no information about 1 up to 12 of these zoning bylaws. That what we're finding out now is that some of these parcels, they're farther along the process than others. So some you have that they're almost at the approved secondary plan level, and apparently 4 of them didn't even have an application. They were pre-application. And what we are learning at these information sessions is that those draft zoning bylaws that were posted on March 4th have been substantially changed, particularly in the scope of the holding provisions. So the holding provisions at the beginning were very minimal. Region appeal comments came along, they were expanded upon, etc. So the scope of the holding provisions, and we understand that the mapping has been revised. So given all of that, so we have unapproved growth management phasing plan, we have secondary plans that are unapproved, we have parcels that are at different points in this whole process, and as been stated, we have insufficient public access to the current drafts. So I'm asking the mayor if she will commit to unbundling those 12 zoning bylaws, complete the growth management phasing plan, complete the secondary plans, and then to hold separate meetings on each of those before bringing this to council for a vote. So I apologize if that's a bit long-winded. I can repeat it if you would like. So I'm asking the mayor specifically if she's prepared to commit to unbundling these, go back to the draft. We need a completed growth management phasing plan. That provides that big picture planning, Janet, that you talked about. We don't have that. The mayor was prepared on April 30th to go forward with a vote on these using minority rules without the information available. So will you commit to that, Mayor Groves?
Just for the record, just so we have that response for the people who may be viewing this later, the mayor is not prepared to commit to the responding to that. I can say that the 12 are already separate, so.
Yeah, no, you've unbundled them.
They're unbundled, yeah, they're individual.
But I think that unbundling them makes them stand alone on their own, and each one requires, under the Planning Act, requires a statutory public meeting. And we need more. The bylaws from March 4th to now are quite different, and they are substantially different. So we would ask very strongly that as the summer goes along, as we get closer to the fall, that kind of information, to know that the public does not know what's in there. We do not know what's in the holding provisions. We need to have public third-party scrutiny of what's in those holding provisions, because everything here is hinging on that. So I'm really hoping that Mayor Groves, that you will consider this strongly. Thank you.
And before you ask the question, we started a little bit late. There's still a line. So with the group's permission, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people still remaining in line. Pardon me, with your permission, I'd like to proceed with having those individuals. I think, Sherry, you're at the tail end of those 7. if you're willing and able to stay, we will take questions. So is everyone cool with that? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I am, like many people in the room here, a Caledon resident, have been for over 3 decades. So many of us have been through those planning processes that you referred to at the start. And when I look at the staff who are speaking and at the staff on the dais, you are part of the new team that's come in under the current administration. New faces, good, fresh ideas are good, but what's missing might be some institutional knowledge or even some historical perspective. And so I'm hoping I misunderstood, but for the benefit of the staff who are new and part of this team, even for the residents who weren't here for those prior planning processes, I guess I'd just like to say do a deep dive, because I'm not entirely sure that the reference of the town was adversarial is correct. I'm not entirely sure that that planning could be described as piecemeal. It was a very thorough process, and a trinodal growth plan was developed by Caledon, Planning Caledon. I'm not entirely sure that those pieces that are missing are the town's fault, and so I'm hoping I misunderstood your suggestions otherwise. But for the staff who are hitching their professional reputations on these plans, and for the residents who maybe weren't here, and certainly for the councillors who are going to vote, perhaps do a deep dive. There was lots of information in the media around that time, all of it in the national press included, not just our locals. And I think for the people who are making these decisions, this is transformative. Do your homework. There is history. There is stuff that needs to be remembered. We need to know why. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And just to provide a point of clarification, and Anne, thank you for that, the council, neither the council nor the town were adversarial, the process, and I apologize for misrepresenting that. It was the process that ended up being adversarial. In no way, shape, or form would the members of council be considered to be adversarial, nor the town itself. So thank you for raising that. I appreciate that.
For a backgrounder, and it leads into the question I'm going to ask. So when they call it a piecemeal process, the problem was Caledon's never had an urban boundary. We just expanded outside our hamlets and villages through our official plan. Brampton and Mississauga both have a hard boundary, the whole area. So that's why they don't have to come to the region appeal all the time for official plan amendments. I think where you're trying to get why it was adversarial is we had a lot of new councillors sitting at Mississauga and Brampton that did not understand Caledon's process is much different than theirs.
Yes.
And that's the issue, and that's why I think it is a good thing that the planning needs to get back to Caledon versus Peel, because we got decisions being made that have no clue what we're about. My concern too is the two leading for the mayor of Mississauga tonight both do not like Caledon, weren't kind even mentioning about us in the election campaign, thank you very much. Concerns me on how we go forward. So to get our cost share for our servicing is very concerning. Halton region were basically broke when they became a region. The region appeal had a plan. Back in 1978, they created a plan for their water servicing by Art Kennedy. It was a mastermind. Designed it how the servicing could get up to the Oak Ridges Marine and the Niagara Escarpment, and basically to be able to service the whole area. And we designed the wastewater and the water plants. As Chair of Public Works, I was well aware of that. Also, as Chair of the Growth Management from 2000, oh my gosh, I'm sounding like Richard Whitehead.
That's a great reference,
Richard
actually.
Nean, yes, great guy for a historian. But so I'm giving the history here. But the concern that we have is we need to look at what Halton Region's doing, because I think we're going to come to a crashing end. You saw that during COVID. They put a hold on Coleraine, which would have been built now, hooked into the 427. They put a hold on Airport Road. They put a hold on Mayfield Road. They put a hold on the water and wastewater on the road below, the road below Bavard, the major throughway. I can't think of it. It's getting late at night.
Queen.
No, below Queen.
Oh.
No, above, between Queen and, Williams Parkway, thank you, to do the lateral thing. But anyway, that has set everything back on where we need to get for infrastructure. So there's still huge dollars to get spent. So the reason why I'm asking the question and why we need to be doing the zoning, I'm in favor of where we need to go with the zoning, but here why I'm saying this, because it all comes together with the plan. We need to be able to do that to start to tie the developers in place, because we need to do front-end loading like what York Region's now doing and what Halton's done for years. That's the only way Caledon's going to be able to move forward. And we need the industrial development to go forward. Growth pays for growth. Only when we meet the target of 25-75, and we're not getting there, we need to be at a 70-30 ratio. What I mean by that, folks, is that 70% is residential development, the rest is industrial commercial, which is that 30%. We're at 25-75 with our official plan. That's what the region gave us. Unfortunately, planning by numbers is insane. The cost analysis, we're barely getting there. So when you look at what the residential's bringing through, scares the bejesus out of me if we don't have the industrial coming shoulder to shoulder, because it's not paying its way. It costs to build homes. I remember Annette Gross, when she was a councillor, asked about Canadian Tire, and they said the range was from about 100 to 300,000. They're very conservative. Net, over and above after all the taxes are basically paid. If you put residential in that same section, it was anywhere from 650 to 900,000 deficit. That's what the industrial development brings. That's how we staff the fire department. That's how we staff the recreation. It's to bring that extra revenue in to help us pay the taxes, because we cannot do it. So all this growth is coming. Our taxes are going up, folks, if we don't get the industrial going. This is why I think it's so important. We need to look at front-end loading. This is where I'm trying to get to. This is what my message is tonight, is you've got to bring it all together. To do these one-offs, great, but if you don't have the industrial coming with it, we're behind the 8 ball, and we need them to be the partners, because they're the long-time landowners. The house builders, they sell, they're gone. The industrial users are here for the long haul. So sorry for my explanation being so long, but I'm going to tell you from what I've learned, especially on that growth management that we had, and you were there, sitting there on the communications side, we heard what the numbers were. And it was very tough, because the growth can't pay for growth if we don't have too much residential coming without the industrial or the employment. And it's hot and cold. Either that market's really hot or it's not at all. So that's something that I'm really encouraging staff, and I'm going to keep harping away at it. Yes, I'm no longer mayor, but I'm a resident here, and I'm going to keep harping because I've seen it. I've seen the numbers. I was also chair of the Rural Caucus at AMO, and we were asking for 1 cent of the HST, do you remember? To help with our roads infrastructure for our roads and bridges across Ontario. Since we couldn't get it done, we campaigned hard for the last election. Because we didn't get it, within that 10-year period, so that was from 22 by 32, will be 23 billion in the hole. Because municipalities and taxpayers can't afford to keep up with the infrastructure and the demands that we need. So we are on a slippery slope here. So to plan for growth, pays for growth, sounds good, but we got to look at the whole picture. We just can't look at those 12 and say that's how it's going to answer. You've got to have the balance. And one more thing. In our official plan, and it's not here now, affordable housing. Yeah. But where's for seniors housing? In Caledon, the 2017 stats, sorry folks, but here's I got useless information in my head, unfortunately. But in 2017, 71% of the homeowners in Caledon were seniors. 65% without a mortgage, 37% live alone. The reason why, when we did the survey to find out why, you know what it is? because there's no place for them to go because they can't sell out the home to have the nest egg to support them for the years as they get older. So you can talk about affordable housing, but you got to do something for seniors. Please put that back in. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for your service for so many years.
So I have a follow-up from my first question that actually I perhaps walked away emotional and didn't ask the question.
Yeah.
Does the town have legal counsel here to answer my question?
We're taking legal questions away to provide a fulsome answer. So we're not going to spontaneously just pull it out. So if you'd like to.
So my very specific question is, I very clearly read the provisions of the Planning Act that show that the town of Caledon did not follow legislatively required notice and information when they held the one PIM that you're saying is happening. I would like to know what you're going to do about it.
Okay, so if, Tracy, would you be able to get a card and write that question down? Tracy's at the back, just so we have your exact wording to make sure that we get the question right, because I don't want to just truncate that based on my memory. So Tracy's back there, she has a clipboard. If you could give that to her, then we will get the answer for you.
Okay, because the answer should be that you did not meet your legal requirements and will restart the process, hold an open house, provide us with the information that we're requesting, and give proper notice to all the landowners that are in proximity, 120 meters under the Planning Act, 1,000 meters by the town of Caledon, and hold both the open house and public information meetings. You say it's different than an MZO. There's nothing in the strong mayor powers under the Municipal Act that say you don't have to follow the Planning Act. And so you've basically violated the law by doing this, and I hope it's rectified. So my next question, because that was my follow-up, is back to this conflict of interest. And this notion that what they said is they felt that they had followed Law Society rules. And what they said was Brendan Ruddick, who was the partner at Loopster Nixon at the one PIM, I'm not allowed to comment on details of specific retainers due to the Law Society rules. But we're confident that there are absolutely no conflicts. So I went to the Law Society to see how they define a conflict of interest. And so what they say is, licensees are prohibited from representing parties whose immediate legal interests are directly adverse in a matter. This is because the licensee cannot effectively represent and fulfill their duties to both clients. Client's consent would not permit so client consent, which is what apparently the town of Caledon has done here, would not permit the licensee to act in these situations because there would be actual impairment of the licensee's duties to each client, not just the risk of impairment. In addition to the duty of representation, licensees owe the duty of loyalty to all clients. Aspects of the duty of loyalty include the duty of commitment to the client's cause, the duty of candor, and the duty of confidentiality. And they go on. So a conflict of interest arises when there is a substantial risk that a licensee's loyalty to or representation of a client would be materially and adversely affected by the licensee's own interests or the licensee's duties to another. So we've already shown the Bolton landowners, North Landowners Group, registered to the same address as Loopster Nixon. They also represented, I wrote it down, A8. I think that was the article, and you should Google, the Trillium did a very good article on it. Lawyer involved in Caledon rezoning bylaws has represented several developers who stand to benefit. But then I learned tonight, thanks to Joanna's excellent research, that the town of Caledon was involved in an LPAT hearing on October 7th, 2020. And it's the region appeal against the Bolton North Hill Landowners Group, who was represented by, can we guess? Quinto Annabelli. And do you know who else was a party to that hearing? So a party against the Bolton North Landowners Group? The town of Caledon. We were represented by Chris Barnett and Alyssa Clutterbuck. So we've actually had adversarial action against this lawyer representing one of, right there, right now, the Bolton North Landowners Group. So it is absurd, preposterous to say that there's not a conflict of interest. I will personally be filing a complaint with the Law Society about this. And I don't know, there might be an Integrity Commissioner complaint here as well, because I don't see our interests being represented by a lawyer who we've already been to a tribunal against. Like this is insanity what's going on here. This is a basic principle of law. It's clearly outlined under clearly outlined on the Law Society's website. It explains very clearly what those rules are. And I think we're all, smart enough to understand that he cannot represent our interests as residents, as taxpayers in the town of Caledon at the same time as he's representing and has represented in the past in a tribunal against us. Like it's just madness. So I would like to add that question to the town's legal counsel about what is going to happen with this. And I think the case is already so compromised if it ever ends up in a hearing because of what has already transpired here. It's just absurd that you would think that this is okay and no one would notice. So I also will be reporting this to the RCMP, who are doing an investigation into conflicts of interest, because that's what it all smacks of to me. And I would like to ask the staff, the professional staff, if they feel this is okay. You all belong to professional societies. Is this okay that you want to tell us that this is appropriate, that this isn't a problem? Because it is. And the council members here who are going to vote on this, I hope that you listen to us in our concerns, because I think you all know that this is wrong.
Good evening. I'm Segi Denenberg from Caledon. Oh, thank you. I have an assistant, as you can see. Thank you.
Tall people unite.
Yes. I want to start with a comment and then a question. You started this evening session and others that you know that you dropped the ball and we gave it to you and you're here to listen, but you didn't pick up the ball, you left the park, there is no answer. It's pretty much what you're telling us is incomprehensible. Maybe tomorrow, maybe not, maybe yes, maybe no. I'll give you an answer at some point. This is how the session goes. But now I have a question to the council, maybe to you, Mayor Groves, and I don't want to bore you with stats, but you're going to approve 12 units. You want to increase the population as mandated by the province, and by the way, you can fight the province. No one said the province mandate, and it has to be done. The province change, governments change, things can change, and you're the town of Caledon Council. You're not the Maple Leaf. You don't roll and play dead when the big bad bear comes to town. So you can fight it. But if we are going to increase the population in 220,000 people, almost quadruple the amount of people in Caledon, we're also quadrupling the problems that we have. We're also quadrupling the lack of services that we have. Now, looking at Canada stats, this is where I took it. It's free information for all. It's 2022 because the 2023 numbers are coming in July. These are the number per 10,000 people, and we all agree that there aren't enough service providers, but this is what we have right now. 8.5 doctors for 10,000 people, 10 vets for 10,000 pets, 18 police officers for 10,000 people, 10 firefighters for 10,000 people, 617 doctors for 10,000 people. Now, if we multiply it by the amount of people that you want to bring, it's 87 doctors that are missing in Caledon. It's about 70 vets that are missing, 360 police officers, 220 firefighters, and roughly looking at 10,000 people, that means 31,000 new students out of the 220,000. That means another 1,900 teachers. So before we bring them in, before we have all the houses, before we have all the approval, where are those service providers are going to come from? We have anyway crisis in recruiting people, and these are just some. I didn't talk about people who work in centers like here. I didn't talk about other things. Where are you going to bring? What is the plan to provide us with more services before we increase the problem and lack of services?
Robert, is that a development pays for development answer? The type of numbers that you're talking about will be built in through the plans of all of those partner agencies. So the school boards, the local fire, the police, all of those elements get built in to grow as development occurs. They don't come first. We don't want them to come after.
We are missing already. It's not about coming first. We are missing already. There aren't enough police officers here. There are more crimes here. There are more car accidents here. There are schools, children that don't have teachers and they sit too many children in class. So this is not a future problem like you planted the tree 20 years ago and you plan for 50 years from now without an answer. This is today. This is problems that we have today, and you don't have answers for us. You don't have it in your budget. You don't have it in any plan. So how will you promise us as citizens, as residents, that we are going to have it?
So I just want to make something really clear with respect to policing.
Mayor Gross, would you mind coming to the mic just so it can be on the recording for the people who aren't here?
Just to be clear on policing, we went through our budget cycle. Our OPP, Detachment Commander, did not ask for any new police officers. She was asked if she needed any new police officers. The answer was no. We were actually at Southfields Community Center. We were doing a community meeting on traffic safety. Again, the question was raised to the Detachment Commander whether or not she has enough officers for Caledon. The answer was yes. With respect to firefighters, this is something that through this process, all of these things will be looked at. The consultation will happen in tandem with the firefighters, with the fire chief. This is not something that is going to be done in isolation. So all of this will be considered throughout the process. The process is also not an overnight process. It's a years and years of planning. It's not happening tomorrow. So throughout the process, all of these things that you mentioned will be considered, and those consultations will be happening. With respect, and I just want to talk about the servicing because the servicing piece came up. Yes, the Region of Peel understands that there is a shortfall in infrastructure dollars, and that is why they are doing things differently. Region of Peel staff went out to the building industry and consulted with the building industry, met with them, and they are certainly looking at front-ending those costs because the region does not have the funding to fund the development. So front-ending is something that the region has been looking at and certainly continues to look at that.
Okay, what about the doctors? What about vets?
Okay. Doctors is something that is across this country.
Right.
It's a global problem. I can tell you that we do have a committee that meets. It's with the Dufferin Caledon, and we're all involved on that committee to talk about the shortage of doctors. You're shaking your head, Councillor Kiernan. There is a plan to address the shortage of doctors in this area. Councillor Kiernan is on that committee. She's representing us. Let me finish, please. She is representing us on that committee in terms of looking at how many doctors that we need here in Caledon today and in the future. So Caledon is being represented on that committee to have those conversations. I will also speak about the TMU, the university that is here. I have had conversations with Dr. Frank Martino, who is the Chief of Staff and President at the Brampton Civic Hospital, to talk about how we can access those doctors. So having that university here is going to be of significant benefit for us here in Caledon. So it's been a problem for many years. The problem has gotten worse. We know that there is a crisis, and the medical industry has made it very, very clear, but this is not a problem that is localized to Caledon. But as I said, we have representation on that committee to look at how many doctors we need here throughout Dufferin, Caledon. And we do have the health minister here, as well as our MPP, which she is very much aware of what we need here.
So how will you make Caledon more, call it lucrative or desirable for people to come here? I'm talking about doctors, vets, and other service providers, because apparently they're all living.
I can't speak for the vets, but I can certainly speak for the doctors. This is something that I've been involved with for many, many years. And I worked with a number of doctors to build the Goodfellow Medical Center. We were able to attract a lot of doctors to our community. And at the time, Caledon put in place an incentive program for new grads. And that program worked extremely well. And I can tell you how many doctors I was able to bring on into Bolton over the years, working with the other doctors that were there, several doctors who are still there. And we continue to bring new doctors into the clinic. There's new doctors that are in the Bolton walking clinic. If you, on Parr Boulevard, I can tell you, there's a doctor there. There's a sign posted there that they're accepting.
I'm here in Caledon, no doctors.
There is a sign posted, this is Caledon, so whether they're located in Bolton or not, you can access health care through any of the doctors that are here, whether they're in Bolton, whether they're in Caledon East, wherever they're located, you can access health care. There are doctors on Parr Boulevard. There is a sign posted that there is a clinic there, and they are taking new patients. So it's walking clinic and family practice. In the at the hotel at the Hampton Inn, there's a medical building there, sign posted as well. New doctors are welcoming patients.
So if I may, a small suggestion, I'm not a marketing person, but this town spends a lot of money on all kinds of consulting, legal, external planning, things like that. One thing to do, perhaps, is to go through school systems for kids that are now 18, graduating, talk to their parents. You'll have many people that will volunteer because they want their kids to go to med school. Take the $100,000 you pay one consultant in a year, and you can easily pay 4 years, and then you say, I'll pay your tuition, you work for me for 5 years later. And then you retain doctors here. And you can do that with doctors, you can do that with vets, you can do that with other services. So you can incentivize them to be here, to work here, to live here. Thank you.
Thank you. We had a couple people leave the line and they were substituted. I gave permission, so we have 3 people left.
Thank you. Okay. Hi. We're really pushed for time, so I'm going to make this really fast. I have an observation and then a question. So slide 15 was a presentation on the use of strong mayor powers in other jurisdictions. And I felt that the information as it was presented may leave people with a slight misunderstanding about the use of strong mayor powers in other jurisdictions. So 43 jurisdictions have used strong mayor powers, 637 decisions. The example was given of Bonnie Crombie in Mississauga pushing through fourplexes. That she actually broke a tie. So it's a very different representation than what was on the slide. And in addition to that, in Welland, so I can speak to 2 of the 637 decisions. In Welland, the strong mayor powers was used to promote a 25-year employee to a more advanced position. And in Hamilton, the SMP was used to go against Ford's directives. So I'm not sure that strong mayor powers have been used in the way that they were going to be used in Caledon, which is quite excessive. And this is my question, and it really is a short one. So, as an organization, does the town have the standards, plans, processes, policies, staff resources, and very importantly, financial capacity to efficiently and effectively manage this pace of growth that is being suggested here? So quickly, does the town have the capacity to manage such rapid growth?
Eric?
So the quick answer is we're getting there. So we're staffing up. There's actually a number of positions out there. Planning staff have been brought in. They brought in a brand new commissioner of planning as one. So this is the plan that goes forward. So what happens is as you grow as a municipality, you start to have to staff up all around. Planning is one of those. Part of the work that's undergoing right now with Region Appeal and the transition talks about transferring the planning that's happening at the Region Appeal to the municipality. That will be something we need to staff up on as well.
How many positions are open right now in the planning and staffing areas?
Maybe 2 or 3. I think it's just, one senior planner position. Is it two senior planner positions? So,
okay.
if you know anyone, please send them my way.
I kind of feel like I could step in now.
All
We've
right.
heard so much about planning in the last
Let me
couple
see
of
your
weeks.
resume.
Okay, so one more quick question. Mr. Osick, since you're up there. Okay, just really, how realistic is it to build 35,000 houses between now and 2030 and 2051? How realistic is it?
So the municipality's role is in building them. It's about enabling them to allow for them to be built. And so you have to make sure you enable it. And that's where municipalities are responsible for.
Okay, but we're taking this huge step, making this huge commitment
It's going to have
on
to be,
enabling.
It's going to have to be well more than 35,000 to meet the population growth overall.
What's the number then?
We're talking, in the neighborhood of 67,000
Okay.
by 2051.
All
So
right,
there's different
67,000
parameters and time
doors.
periods.
2031. Wow.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for that information. I appreciate it.
That's by 2051, not 2031, but that's the number of doors, yes.
My question is somewhat related to that. Originally, I was going to ask who determines and who has the authority to determine what housing mix is built to make sure that the community's needs, the seniors and et cetera, are all taken into account, and who has the vision for what these communities are going to look like. But I think the question I really want to ask, and what I'm hearing, is enticement. Competition, proactive, we're open for business, attract them in. But to confirm, there's no way the town can actually compel the developers and the builders to come in and build. If we say we want 13,000 homes or 35,000 or 67,000.
Correct.
We can offer them all kinds of things, but we can't make them come here and do that by the timelines we'd want them to.
Correct.
So how much are we going to give them in hopes that they're going to actually come here and build? How much are we going to give away or incent them? Or 'cause this just seems like you were giving them a big sandbox to do whatever they want in hopes that they're going to come here. But I mean, is that land just going to sit there for decades, sort of being speculated back and forth among the developers without anything actually being built?
Eric?
Pardon?
So on the first question, what happens is when it's through the secondary planning, you have professional planning staff that are looking at these areas. They work with the development community and those that are landowners looking to see things out. A lot of it's market driven, and that's what ultimately is the answer to the second one, is the market often drives things. We can't compel development. It's in the nature of what occurs when it comes to development.
So doing this rezoning of all this area ahead of all of the planning is really not going to guarantee that we're going to get that housing.
Well, we can't do guarantees. It's about enabling, because that's what the municipality's responsibility is enabling growth to allow to be able to occur.
The builders would have bought the land just to keep it there and do nothing.
But look at all the land that's around the province or in the GTA that's approved for development that's not being developed.
If they want to develop it, it's going to happen. They don't just sit there.
If they want to develop it.
They want to develop it. They don't buy it. They just sit there.
If it gets zoned, that property becomes very valuable.
So we're getting off mic, and we don't have this on the recording part, so just in summary, we don't have the ability to compel anyone to do anything, but we're doing everything we can in this particular situation, or we're doing something, not everything, something in this situation to create an environment that demonstrates that Caledon is, and you won't like this phrasing, open for business for when someone decides to move forward in the development industry to help meet the targets that the province has set down and for us have been conveyed to us through the Region of Peel.
And I have no issue with being prepared for that and
Yeah.
laying the groundwork for that. I just don't think this is the right way
Okay.
of doing it.
Yeah, thank you.
I think this just opens us up to having a lot of area that's basically covered in dirt bike tracks and illegal dumping as people kind of move out of that area because nobody's going to buy into an area that's all going to be developed anyway. So it just sort of turns into a no man's land.
Appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. And this is our last question for the evening. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
This is not a question. This is to support Mr. Denenberg's question to Mayor Groves in regards to OPP. I'm not sure if you're aware, but at the McDonald's in Bolton, they had a have a coffee with a cop. I spent pretty close to an hour talking to Mary Louise Kearns. I expressed to her my concerns of living in Caledon East. And yes, she is short of police officers. She told me that. Well, this is what I said to Mary Louise. I said, I'd love to have the councillors and the mayor and yourself present because one always blames the other here. I've explained to her the situations of the aggressive driving, loud exhaust systems on cars on Old Church, right in front of our flagship place here. And she said to me, she gave me some statistics, I don't recall them exactly, but Caledon's crime rate is becoming one of the highest in Ontario. So we're going to put more homes in here, guys, and we're going to have higher crime. This is exactly what she told me. So I just want to support Saggy's thing here with you, Mayor Groves, that we need to get together with the police and let's get to the bottom. I nearly got run off the road on Gore Road one morning at 6:30. My wife called the police officers. There's no one to come. By 10 o'clock, they call you back. And Officer Dillon, and I expressed this to the inspector, we do not have enough police officers on the road. We can't be everywhere. I just want to support him that we should get something going on that because I think it's important if we're going to put more people here. Thank you.
Thank you, and I really appreciate that. We will definitely be taking that back and having those conversations because we want an accurate representation. Budget time will be coming soon, and that's where those important asks come. Thank you to everyone for sticking it out with us tonight. It's 20 to 10. I'm sorry I'm keeping you from your pillow. Thank you for those of you who came to all 4 sessions, who have thoughtfully provided questions, concerns, pushback, support, whatever it may be. You are truly appreciated for participating this intensively. We don't have a date for when the bylaws will come back. They will be coming back at some point. So I look forward to seeing you whenever that point is, and maybe on the street, maybe not at the McDonald's where the conversation happened. Thank you so much, and take care.